Direct from historic downtown Orange, California, it's time for the Bob Gurr Show. From undersea adventures to highways in the sky, he's done it all. And now, here's your host, the man, the myth, the Disney legend, Bob Gurr.
Hey kids, I get a lot of guests here at our studio down in Orange, near the traffic circle, a beautiful little town here. I've got a visitor from Palm Springs this time, and I've known him probably a dozen years or more. This is Dusty Sage. Anyway, he's a guy that does all kinds of stuff. He's like a host, he's an author, he's an organizer, puts on events and all this kind of stuff. So I got a really super businessman here for once, and we have a lot of times fun with just easygoing, fun people, like Charles Finnick, stuff like that. But we have Dusty Sage. You can tell from this nice fuzz on the front of his face, which is a pretty long fuzz by now, and he keeps that just right. I'm always amazed. I've kept track of him for years. This beard gets more and more and more distinguished. He's actually a British actor. You can tell, and it gives him a ton of authority. Wherever he is, he can pontificate, and he just does this, and everybody goes, "Oh, this guy, I have to watch out for him." He may pick on me here, but we're gonna have a nice little chat here. Now, I never tell people what I'm going to do, and you're gonna have to bear with me. All right.
I'm ready, Bob.
I find, well, you're very successful at what you do, and the interesting thing I find out, people who are very successful usually have a pretty good line of what they do very, very well. And I'm always curious, where did that start? And I find out the best place is to ask somewhere between 3 years old and 5 years old. People will experience something and they're not quite sure what it was. They can't remember it all, but it doesn't make sense. And it might be something that was so interesting, oh, I want to go back. Or it was, oh, that was horrifying. Hope I never see or hear that thing ever again. These are the little, like either trauma or exotic stuff between the age of 3 and 5. And everybody says, well, I can't remember anything like that. And sure enough, they do. So tell me a couple of little things that they're somewhere in your mind and they never make sense. And you can't tie them together. But I find those are the first seeds that you get the nature you get through your DNA, but the nurture comes along, good or bad or whatever, from either family or friends or whatever. And those are the two things that gradually combine and put you on a path that, number one, you do it from the heart, not the head. That seems to be the clue.
I think you're right. And it does, for me, go all the way back to about that age when my grandmother took me in and basically raised me. And she was an Auntie Mame sort of a character. I just lost her at 102 years old. But she was the sort of person that would take your hand and spark wonder and take you on an adventure. And traveled all over the world with her, saw the most incredible plays and visited art galleries, and she'd always have me dressed up like a little man. And I really think that it was her that sparked the passion for adventure, for learning to articulate the things I'm passionate about. And she was also the sort of person that was never quite happy with the way things were, always wanted them to be just a little bit better. So I'd be very proud and run to her with something I made or did or accomplished. And she'd say, well, that's great, but what will you do next time? And that really stuck with me my whole life.
Well, interesting you said that. That just thrilled me to no end because my grandmother was exactly the same way. In fact, I wrote in one of the books I wrote, which I called The Grandmother Effect. that somehow that split in the generation between your mother and your father, but the grandmother, grandfather, somewhere along the line, that is where the real wisdom gets put back in. And good grandmothers are the ones, they know how to approach a child just right, so it's welcoming, not scary. And if they back that up with the fact that they have wisdom and they are a nonstop talker to explain things to you. In my case, my grandmother had an old Plymouth. Sometimes I'd ride in the rumble seat, sometimes I'd be in the front with her. And every time we saw something, she explained the why of it.
Exactly.
And that was, to me, was fascinating. And look, I didn't know you and I had a parallel start.
And what a great way to start. You know,
Yeah.
grandparents have it best.
Yeah.
They don't have to go through all the trouble of raising the child usually, and they just get to do the good part.
Yeah.
Spend time with them, go places, you know, be there for the child. So they get all of the credit, and they don't have to have any of the hard work.
Yeah.
So really, grandparents are magic.
Yeah.
And I was really lucky to have some really good ones.
Can you give me a couple of examples of little incidents you might remember that you might be fun to hear about?
Yeah, I remember, I think it was first or second grade, and I was going through a really hard period of adjusting and figuring out what the teachers wanted. I sort of hated going to school. It turns out later I found out I was dyslexic, and the reason I was having trouble was I saw everything backwards, but they didn't diagnose that back then. And my grandmother knew I was upset. And one day at lunchtime, she showed up at school. She had a little bag of lunch, and she could tell I was upset. She said, "Don't even bother to open it." And she took me by the hand out to her car, and we drove away. And she took me out to lunch, and we never went back to school. I don't think I went back for a week or two. She had me off. We went out of town. We went shopping. We did all sorts of things, and it was all educational. She was trying to teach me things, but basically, she was trying to figure out, why am I having trouble at school? What's going on? She wasn't going to have me go back until she had it 100% figured out. I don't think she ever did figure it out, but she did get comfortable in her head with sending me back and taking me into the principal's office, and she herself set the record straight for them, how it was going to go for me, you know, when I came back. And I was really impressed, even at a young age, like, this woman, she knows how to take charge.
You had an agent, grandmother.
Grandmother agent, and she did that too. She took me to the local theaters and had me audition for things. Yeah, she definitely, she had visions in her head.
Yeah,
I don't know that she envisioned this, but
yeah. Well, again, I can understand that kind of a position because luckily, due to the Depression of about the time I was born, we lived at grandmother's house. So I sort of had the advantage, well, you got a mother and father, but oh, I've got this interesting gray-haired creature that comes to my crib, you know, we're gonna do stuff. And along the way, when I had to be expelled from the third grade, she was the one that stood up and made the arrangement to transport me and put me into a military academy.
wow.
She was also the one that went down and walked me into the Art Center College to do car design. So she had this trailing relationship all that life. And also,
Interesting.
I didn't find out that I was dyslexic till too late because I thought I was just not good at stuff. And I still today, on a computer, I know what I'm going to type. I tell the finger to go to this key, and it goes to another key. And I have to look. I have to do some of this, and then I go in and I correct. Or some days, I have to go left, so I went right, round and round. I can tell if it's Monday, and they did a couple of boo-boos before breakfast. So okay, just calm down. It's going to be one of those days. It's more of a come and go kind of a thing.
I think a lot of creative people are dyslexic, and it's your brain learning to overcompensate in ways that you can function. And I find myself saying things out loud, and in that process, catch my mistakes, but not just the spelling, grammar type mistakes, but the logical mistakes. So I ended up becoming essentially a writer even though I'm dyslexic and it takes me twice as long to
Yes.
write anything as anyone else.
I understand.
But people will say, how do you write that way? You're so descriptive and you're so insightful. Well, it's really in part because I have to think it all through so many times. And other people might write it out and send it, and I
Yeah.
can't do that.
Yeah, I find out, I thought I was the only one that will do a phrase and I have stop and look and read it. Where did it start? Where's it going to go? What do I do now? And then you go add a couple of phrases. You get down to maybe 3 or 4 sentences in a paragraph, and then you read it. Oh, it's got to be rearranged.
That's
So
right.
yes, it's probably 10 times longer than a regular person who can just think and do and make it work.
Sometimes when I read it through, it's almost like I wasn't the one that wrote it, because it all comes out of my head one way, and then I look at it with an objective eye when I go through it again, and it does allow me to rethink it all. And so I'm my own proofreader, and I think it's a blessing in a way. And when I was younger, I didn't know what was going on. When I got older, by college, it was a real problem. To be fast enough, to complete a test quickly enough, all of those things were problems. But then when you're out on your own and you're making your own schedule, it's been a blessing because it really has helped me be more creative.
Yes, I've read about and I've met people that are kind of dyslexic. Some are really dyslexic, regular, and some have this little come and go wave. And I met a race driver once, Jackie Stewart, who was a Scotsman, and back in the 60s, going into the 70s, he won the national world championship on Formula One auto racing. And I talked to him once, and apparently he's in a position where he sputters around all the time. As soon as he sits down in the car and the green flag drops, he concentrates only on that car. And it was a funny thing that a dyslexic person could somehow wipe the dyslexic interference off, and they can concentrate for a while and do something just like anybody else. I was kind of amazed to learn that about the guy.
Was that true about you too? Were you able to just focus on something at work and get it done? Because you're very prolific. You probably produced more attractions than just about any other Imagineer of the same time frame that you were working for Disney. So how were you able to accomplish that with the dyslexia?
Oh, okay. Well, okay. You're interviewing me.
Well, I'm so curious.
Okay. Yeah. All right. No, let's put it. If you were to look at the years I was with Disney, let's say at least we'll say the last 10 years, very solidly, I had an office where I kept all the lights off in the room, and I had only the little Dazer drafting board light over my board. And I generally had the door closed so I don't hear people walking in the hallway. And I had a plant, like an ivy, went all the way around the ceiling so that it had a different feel in this place. And with just those elements, I could start designing something that's incredibly detailed, because I'll have a broader picture in my mind, and sometimes the visions of like a vehicle or something, or aspects of it, will be so vivid, coming so quickly, I can't draw it fast enough. So I sketch out stuff, and then I've got in my mind, okay, here's the overall configuration. Like diving down, what are the stuff that needs to be done first? Like a monorail, let's say that Mark IV monorail in Florida. I wind up designing, say, 95% of the details of the whole doggone train, right down to the rivet patterns and little doubler brackets in the structure, because that's the way it's going to be. But I could do that, and the phone would occasionally ring. I have to stop, pick up the phone, or occasionally somebody would come in and sit down and close the door. But I always remember how people would say, how does Bob do that? He sits in that little dark cave, and he's with a pencil and a paper on that drafting board at every hour. Sometimes I got to go to the shop to answer a question. But those minutes where I could go pretty long, the design ideas are flowing so fast, I just can't draw it fast enough. Then we do this, what we call master layouts, and then I give those to the draftsman. They take the master layouts and do production drawings, copying every detail that I've already put on paper. Most people would never work that way where you say, whole monorail train, oh, it's got 10 cars. Well, okay, we'll look at one car. Okay, well then what are the main parts of the car? And you can reduce it down in about 30 seconds. What part am I doing and why am I doing that? In detail down to a hole in a piece of metal.
Amazing.
But I think it's the dyslexic thing that you somehow, the dyslexia will back away just enough. I can run full speed without a mistake. And then something interrupts and now I make a mistake doing something. That's my experience. What is that like with what you get?
Very much.
Okay.
I also, when I write, I have to do it in a dark room. And I can work wherever I am. I just need my tablet computer with me. But I have to be free of distractions. I can't have the television on or even music. And I will go into a trance and start working. Let's say I start working at 7 p.m. It might be 3 a.m. before I even lift my head up and look at a clock and realize I've been working for hours and I didn't take a break. I didn't have anything to eat or drink. It's time to go to bed. But I go into that trance and I'll get it done. And I have to get the whole thought. So I can't get up in the middle of an article and wander around and come back to it. It won't make any sense to me anymore. So I have to just focus on it and do it. And that's how I get things done. Amazing.
I'm learning about myself listening to you.
Well, same.
Oh my gosh. So anyway, at some point in time, you got into kindergarten. I'd like to know the period of time, but kindergarten's the first place that you suddenly are faced with an organized day. All right, what was that like?
I rebelled against any form of organization. That was the hard part for me. The minute the teachers had one thing they wanted me to do, that was the time I was looking out the window because maybe there was a bird or God forbid it was snowing. I grew up in Kansas, so there was plenty of snow.
Okay.
And every little distraction or noise or what another child was doing, that was my focus. So early on, the teachers either loved me because I was a cute kid and, I was very attentive to them, but I wasn't necessarily a great student early on. Organization was not my strong point.
I think you just dropped a hint of that you are an extrovert at heart, and you saw that about yourself somehow in the way you behaved and interfaced with people in kindergarten. Would that be a good guess?
For sure. I was friends with all the kids, constantly trying to, get them to play and do certain things. I definitely was organizing them, but I couldn't be organized myself. So, whatever the part of the day was where we were learning something, I was either sleeping or running around in the back of the room, or I would just get up out of my chair and go to the back of the room and play with some toy or something that was back there. Eventually I do get better, but say when I was younger, probably not the easiest child to teach.
Well, this is another curiosity. You just used the word organizing and kindergarten. That seems kind of unusual because I think some kids in kindergarten are slightly intimidated because they've got a person there that's usually a woman that's not their mother, and they're not sure quite what to do, so they have a tendency to be a little more reticent. But somebody would jump in with the other kids, and you organize them when the job of organizing is supposed to be the teacher.
Yeah, I was disorganizing, let's say. The teacher was teaching something, and I was teaching or had my own separate agenda. And I do remember most of my early teachers. I became very friendly with all of them right away. I always wanted hugs from the teacher. I was always bringing them presents. So I cared about them, but maybe not enough to listen to them all day. So I definitely had other things I wanted to do.
That's another interesting characteristic. I've seen some students, now that I think about it, they care for a teacher beyond the teaching part. They see them as an actual friend, where most people would think, well, teachers are authority, I shouldn't get too close. But in my case, I had one or two that either saw that I was different or I needed to be calmed down or something, and they stepped in far enough that they became a good friend. They didn't have much, but that was still there. Okay, now you get into grammar school beyond the kindergarten, and get up to where you're about ready to leave that 6th grade, because that's a big jump, I think. You have literally the mother all day long, the mother teacher, so to speak. And then you jump into a situation where you have the periods that come with being 7th grade and onward, in which you now have multiple teachers, the multiple mothers. How did that fracture things for you?
It really did. And my father was in a career that we were constantly moving. So every 6 months to a year, we were in a different city, which meant I was in a different school, sometimes once or twice a year, some years. So it was very hard for me to get all the things I needed out of a classroom, as there was a new teacher to get to know. There were new students to learn to navigate and make friends with. And then you get to the point where you have multiple teachers, and it was a lot. So I had maybe 4 or 5 different teachers every year or every 6 months, and it was a lot. And I didn't have stable friends to rely on. I'd make a friend, and then we would move. So it was a really difficult time in my life. Different schools are teaching different things at different times. So I was either ahead or behind, depending on what school I was in. So I don't have a lot of great memories of those years just because they were so difficult. But the minute I got home, there were consistent projects I was working on. Legos, erector sets, drawing, whatever I was working on, swimming, those kinds of things were always there, and they were stable regardless of where I lived. So I don't remember a lot about school from that period, but I remember a lot about the things I was interested in, and that's really when I started researching Disney and theme parks, because it seemed like the magical thing that I wanted to do, but I wasn't close enough to be able to do it. And every report, every drawing I made, everything I did had something to do with a monorail or a ride or Walt Disney from about that period onward.
Can you tell me what years? Then I could figure out what age you were and what the status of Disney
right
at
around
that time.
4th and 5th grade. We moved from the Midwest to California, and I saw Disneyland for the first time. And we moved pretty quickly thereafter, but that was all I needed. That little taste of Disneyland, I'm like, whoa, we're not in Kansas anymore.
Right.
And that sparked my curiosity.
What year?
That was the 70s.
Okay.
So it was sort of still a magical time at Disneyland, you know, Walt's heavy influence still in the parks. And it was, I can still remember walking into that park for the first time, not knowing what to expect, because I'd already read a lot about Disney and had been looking into it, doing papers at school, but then I saw it for the first time. And it was both better than I expected and much smaller than I expected.
This is common because if you look at imagery of things and you're very delighted and have an anticipation of things, it always has a tendency that I thought this was bigger. You know, and in the case of Disneyland, if you ever grew up in Florida and then they moved to California, you go, what happened to the castle? it's a dinky little thing. This is very fascinating. I want to back up just a little bit. You mentioned Lego toys, of course, and do stuff with your hands. And you're primarily a writer and a writer organizer these days. What what other things, this is an interesting combination. A person who usually is a writer or an organizer or a strong extrovert usually is not a person that's known for doing stuff with their hands, creating and playing and building and stuff like that. That's an interesting mix. Have you found that you're a little bit more broad brush interest in stuff? Have you put all that to work that makes your career what it is?
It's an interesting concept. I've never thought of it that way, but it is true that when I was younger, I was primarily a builder. I used Legos, and I was always building airports or cars. Neither one are things that I am particularly interested in today, and I know they're things you're very interested in, but I was building airports, and my mother found this set from Germany of just girders and window panels and things, and there was a board, and they had diagrams of different airports in the world, and I would build one airport after another, take it all apart afterwards, and then start building Munich Airport and or Heathrow. And it was just something I was interested in, and then I would use my Legos to build something. And then I found my uncle's old erector set. Metal girders, the little cogs and wheels and things, and I would build roller coasters. So if you turn those girders upside down, they had two like metal, rails essentially, and so I could turn it into a roller coaster track, and then take the two round wheels that also had grooves and make them roll on this track. And then through that, I found a company named Bandai out of Asia that made tubing, and I would connect the tubing and make real roller coasters out of parts of things that I had. And now Bandai makes space warp roller coaster sets and things, and that has nothing to do with me, but that was my interest. And I did think for a while I was going to become an Imagineer and build roller coasters. And then at some point, I started writing, and all of that went away, and I was just writing all the time, marketing, PR for big telecommunications companies. I ended up in a career so different from the trajectory that I thought I was going to go into. I really wanted to be a creative, and I guess I am in some ways, but I ended up just kind of getting sucked into a world that I was very successful in, but not necessarily the one I wanted to do.
That's interesting, because I do run across people that they do make several career shifts that surprise them. Because people generally think, and the teachers will generally say, you must have a goal in life, and the teacher's going to take you this path to the goal. And then some people wind up, they turn around and look backward and says, I'm doing stuff I never had any idea I'd ever do, and I'm not trained in it, and I was never interested. Why am I doing it? It looks like you went through one of those things, but I want to back up just a little bit. I think the fact that anybody who can grasp physical objects and range things in space gives them an extremely good grounding for all the other things that are not physical based, like thinking, organizing, have a much better perspective of the aspects of what needs to be done in organization, that has the understanding of a physical reality of stuff that is going to have to happen at your order given in a way. Do you ever see that kind of a connection?
Absolutely. There were those two sides of me when I was younger, aside from being a little human chaos cannon. I was either building something or I was acting. My grandmother always had me doing theater, improvisational theater, stage theater, musicals. And then when I was at home with my parents, I was always building, which they were very happy with. And then when I went to college, I did neither of those two things. And I still don't understand why, but the coursework, there's that magic moment in college where you realize that everything you know about the world isn't true. and that they open your eyes to the possibilities of a million different things. And I just started taking classes in all the things that I'd never gotten in Kansas. And that just took me down a path of English and history and places that I hadn't really gone in my head when I was younger and involved in theater and building things and not paying attention in school.
This is the more I the more I listen to you, the more I'm finding how many parts there are to all the path you took up to the point where you started solidly doing something. When was the first time that you really saw, let's say, authoring, excuse me, and organizing really was now going to be the thing out in front of you?
I've always been fascinated by what is new. And when the internet was new, and for those of you who have never known a time in your life that there wasn't an internet, I assure you there was, because there was a time when I didn't have a phone in my pocket. I didn't even have a phone in my bedroom. We had one phone in the kitchen. I think that was the only phone in the house. But this internet is new, and I had a clunky used computer, and I would get a disc in the mail from a company called AOL, America Online, and it would give you a certain number of free minutes.
Yep.
And I would put that disc in my computer and get my free minutes on the internet, and I found there was information, but there was a chat room. And every morning I would start a chat room about Disneyland.
Oh.
And when the last person in that chat room would go to bed at the end of the night, the room would just disappear. And so the next day, maybe I put in a new disc and I'd start a new name, and I would start another chat room. And that sort of evolved into a lot of different things, because that Disney chat room became me meeting other people that were interested in Disney. I was still living in Kansas, and when I graduated from college, and with this knowledge from these people in the Disney chat rooms, I decided I was going to pack the few boxes of things I owned, put them in my Mitsubishi Mirage, and take a leap of faith. And I moved to California with no job and no place to live, and just a few $100s in my pocket. And I went.
I think I'm smelling the first fumes of MiceChat showing up in the blogosphere. Is that right?
It is.
Tell me
very
what
much.
year and what age.
So it was about 93 or 4
Okay.
that I packed up my car
Okay.
and got to California. I didn't really I had 2 dogs, little Shelties, and this old car that was burning oil every stop. I put both gas and oil into the car. And I went to the beach, and I ended up in Ocean Beach in San Diego, because it was a beach I had read about that dogs could run around on. And I opened the door, and the dogs ran on the beach, and I just kind of sat there and thought, what have I done? What am I going to do? Where am I going to go? There's nowhere to plug a computer in. I have no food. I have nowhere to live. And I sorted it all out pretty quick. I went to a temp agency. They hired me that day. And within a month, the company that hired me as a temp brought me on to work for them full-time as a manager. And within the year, they wanted me to take a more senior role there. And I still don't understand how or why the fate of it all worked out the way it did. But somebody said, you're really, interesting guy, and you can speak. Why are you doing this thing you're doing? And I was working for Hyundai, the company that makes cars, and they had a tractor trailer division. And it turns out I was the only one in the tractor trailer division that in that office in San Diego that was a native English speaker. The rest of them were all Koreans.
Oh.
And they really liked me, and I could speak to these truck drivers without them yelling at me. But from that, I just ended up working my way through Orange County and ended up at Nextel Communications. And within a very short period of time, I was director of customer service for their Desert Southwest region, and in charge of training and all sorts of things interfacing with customers. And I loved it. I loved that aspect of dealing with customers, trying to make people's lives a little better. You know, customer service is never fun, but how can we make it better for the customer and for the employees? And so at that point, I always imagined I would be working at Disney. You know, I moved to California not to work in telecom or live on a beach, but to work for Disney. But I was too successful in my job and making too much money. And every time I would go to Disney to see what jobs were available, they paid half of what I was already making. And so I never ended up working for Disney. And but instead, to fill that niche, and this is where the MiceChat comes in, the internet is now fully formed. There are lots of websites, and I start getting involved with the Disney stuff and meeting with people every Sunday at noon at Disneyland and making friends. And one thing leads to another. And Al Lutz and I start Mice Age and MiceChat. So he runs Mice Age, which is really the rumor site. I start MiceChat, which is a discussion forum, or was at the time. And that's how MiceChat formed.
Well, this is interesting because I believe I first met you on one of those days where you and your team were down at DCA. I think it was right near the Italian winery facility. And that's the first time I had ever poked my nose into a gathering. I just read about that. I didn't know much about it. But I was quite surprised, and then your suggestion was, "Oh, you've just written a book, Bob. We should publish give publicity
That's right.
to your book," and that opened my eyes to a world of social stuff to do with the Disney company. When I only saw it, well, I used to design and build stuff there, but I do go once in a while, and then I see this whole new thing in the blogging and the gathering and the games to play and do, and it's a whole bunch of people interested in stuff, and you were in the mix of that thing. This must have been a magical period of time when I'm sitting on the beach. Oh, I get hired. I'm in the truck business.
Yes.
You know, coming from Ken, you're in the truck business after sitting around the beach, and then seeing what the internet is exploding in all directions. You must have seen a ton of possibilities, and you dove into things. So this is a good spot for let's have you describe more the professional. Let's go from 2012 up, and how you branched out into different things. And then I would like to have you tell me more about what do you see that you're doing now, and what do you see next? So the floor is yours, sir.
I have to tell you how difficult this is for me, because I'm usually the one asking questions like this of people like you, and it's hard for someone like me to open up in that way, but it's also exciting because you're the one asking. You know, I started writing about Disney 25 years ago.
Okay.
Very shortly after I started professionally writing about Disney, and it was always more to me than a hobby, I met you. And you have been more at the center of my success probably than any other single individual, because in part, you were there at Disney with Walt and knew firsthand. Everyone else on the internet is talking just about what they think, what they guess, what they hope, what they love, what they hate. But I could always ask a Bob Gurr and get a real answer.
Yeah, because I was well grounded back to 54. Well, that's an honor that I was that sort of that ground post that you could latch onto, and then to understand the reactions that contemporary people today in the lateral chit-chat, like you say, opinions.
Right. And while others were focused solely on, you know, what the Disney company was doing at that time, through you and other people I knew, I was meeting Alice Davis and Mark Davis and Existencio and Rolly Crump and people like that, and many of the animators, some of the executives, and some of the old Disneyland executives. And it was eye-opening to me that these were the stories that I needed to celebrate and focus on and tell. And that was going to be my niche. My niche was going to be to apply the information from real legends to modern day Disney business. And that has sort of been the through line in what has allowed me to do the things that I do. And so MiceChat leads to other things, but MiceChat allowed me to meet all of you. And then from there, MiceChat is now able to help with other things. And
what are some of these other things that you've branched out into?
well, one day I was working at my office. I worked for a telecommunications company in Van Nuys, and I was living in Newport Beach. I think when you were younger, you had a similar commute.
Yeah,
And
no.
I remember you telling me one day you came over to my house in Newport Beach, and I was rolling into the garage late and harried, and I looked a mess, and you're like, what is going on? And I'm like, well, I just had a 4-hour drive from Van Nuys to Newport Beach, and I'm making this drive every single day, every morning, every night. And you said, well, I used to do that when I worked at Disney, and it helped put in my mind that if you could do it all those years, you know, I could do it. But I was hating my job, and a young couple that builds theme park attractions, they build soaring rides and some other things, approached me, and they said they had purchased the house Walt Disney was born in. And Walt was born in Chicago, Illinois in 1901. And did I have any ideas for what they might do with it or what it could become? And in that process, we decided to start a nonprofit. And I said, but the problem is I can't leave my job. I make way too much money. And they said, well, when you die, no one's going to remember that you worked in telecom. But they might remember that you saved Walt Disney's birthplace. And I said, done. I'll do it. Well, for a year. Give me a year, and I'll take a leave of absence from my job, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to get it launched. I ended up staying for 5 years. And we did restore the house. It became the center for early childhood creativity and innovation, Walt Disney Birthplace. I'm still involved with them from time to time. I'm planning a charity event with them right
Why
now.
don't you explain to some of our listeners that you're talking about Chicago?
Chicago, Illinois. Walt born in 1901. The house was built and designed by Walt's parents, Elias and Flora, in 1893 for the birth of their third child, Roy Disney, Walt's younger brother. There was 2 other boys before that. But the whole reason Walt's parents were there in Chicago was Elias heard there were jobs to build the World's Fair, Chicago World's Fair. That was the first public displays of electricity. There was a Ferris wheel. They called it the White City. It was a very exciting time. It seemed very futuristic to Chicago. Some say that's what inspired The Wizard of Oz. And this is the milieu in which Walt Disney is born. His father building this futuristic city, and then Walt is born in 1901 in Chicago and hearing stories, and Baum was living in the neighborhood. And I just think that house represents a magical moment in time, because 1901, turn of the century, same sort of feeling as Main Street, USA. It really is the story of Walt's beginnings.
You know, I just seeing this picture in my mind that I've never grasped that period of time in Walt's life. You know, we say, oh, he was born there, and you don't go beyond the word born. I'm just seeing, you got a little itty-bitty kid. He is surrounded with exploding technology and business expansion. Everything's from about 1895 on up. It just exploded.
Yes.
And he's born, this little kid, in this delight of everything going on all at once. My God, he probably would have grown up and said, I want to build a park by myself someday.
I really think that's true, because so many of the things from Walt's childhood
Yeah.
kind of come back full circle later in his life. For example, his parents met in an area in Florida near current day Walt Disney World. And they weren't far from Kissimmee. And then they moved to Chicago to build this World's Fair. And I don't think Walt ever got that out of his head, because he ends up building kind of, or wanting to build his own kind of World's Fair type of enterprise. And Disneyland has many of the aspects of entertainment that a World's Fair might have, but also that Wizard of Oz theme in there. And while Walt didn't really do a Wizard of Oz film, I know he wanted to, he was, I think, he was excited by that notion that a Midwestern child from the gray Midwest could end up in a fully colorful and exciting and vibrant world, and then built that world. Because he goes also from Chicago and Marceline, Missouri and Kansas City out to Los Angeles, and then builds a Wizard of Oz, essentially. An incredible, colorful, creative enterprise.
That's interesting, because they arrived, family, or at least he did, in 1923.
Right.
That's the same year my mother family came from Kansas to Los Angeles, 23, and my father arrived from England through Toronto to Southern California in 23.
Wow.
Both my parents and Walt and Roy, well, Roy was here for at that period of time. I begin to, and more I talk to people, and like what I'm learning from you is I learn more aspects of how Walt saw things and gathered things and got inspired to go do stuff. That although I talk about Walt a lot, I'm learning more little tidbits here and there of that path that he had.
It's interesting. There are always coincidences.
Yes,
you know, you and I have so many coincidences about our youth and the dyslexia and other things, and you know where we come from, and Walt and your family. My grandmother would say, "Is it coincidence or is it kismet?" And I do think that certain people are just drawn to certain things at the same time, and there was an opportunity in the 20s. For people willing to take it. And they were difficult times. You know, we're talking about the Roaring 20s going straight into the Great Depression, and many people lost everything, and others just had opportunity. Because if you can see the way forward in difficult times, you're going to be light years ahead of everyone else when times improve. And Walt was one of those people. I think his dad was one of those people always looking for that opportunity and never quite getting there. His father had a million different jobs, a lot of them construction related or church related. He started a soda company that I helped bring back to life. But he never really succeeded at anything. But Walt saw his dad try over and over and over again. So he learned, well, if at first you don't succeed, try again. And he eventually hits with the Disney company and Disneyland. And people don't realize, though, Disney company is massive, and they think of it as just a gigantic corporation, couldn't have failed. It could have failed 100 different times, and almost did. And Walt was mortgaging his house and his business to make the next movie or to build Disneyland. He was willing to take risks. Not very many people are willing to take those life-altering risks.
That was a big risk, because I can recall vividly that we had such a black period all through the summer of '55, and we could take a breather about the time of August or September when the kids go back to school. We closed on Mondays and Tuesdays just to try to fix everything. And I remember at that time I thought, this is a temporary job. I don't know where it's going to go. Because I just didn't have the faith in the continuation of this, because the attendance dropped off to very little. And suddenly around Thanksgiving, it started to pop. And I think that was the first inkling, at least I had, was, well, I might just stay. This is might work. And of course, by Christmas time, Walt had put the Christmas tree lights on the top of all the buildings, which after Christmas, he said, oh, take the color and leave the white ones, and then call it rim lighting. So that's why Disneyland has a certain look. Everything is outlined And I guess what? It came out of that Chicago Fair.
For sure.
Because he saw it as a little itty bitty kid. That's an image in your mind.
Yep.
So let me ask you, from where you are now, what do you see for Mr. Dusty Sage coming up next? But I first want to ask, I've been to the desert and it's always dusty and you can smell the sage. Why are you a Dusty Sage?
Well, obviously, it's not my real name, but like many of people that were involved in the early days of the internet, you take a screen name because only crazy people were online back then. So nobody was stupid enough to use your real name. And people had wild names, still have some wild names online, you know. They take things that they love, so forth. I was Dusty because I was from Kansas. And as a kid, I was always building. So I was
half of it.
Yeah, I was in the backyard putting ditches in my mother's vegetable garden and the garden hose and floating boats through her vegetable garden. So I'd come back into the house covered in mud and dirt, and my dad would say, "Well, there's Dusty," and the Dusty stuck.
Ooh.
And so Dusty was sort of the nickname, and Sage means wise man. And I was the wise man of Disneyland, but I never ever wanted to come across as being the one who knew everything. I was more the one putting the pieces together. So I was a Dusty Sage.
Thank you for explaining. Kids, do you understand how when you pick a good name, you need to pick a name that really, really means something so you're well grounded in it. So when a guy like me asks a guy, tell me about your name, I can go, oh, that was pretty serious sounding. Yeah, and it was. Yeah. So what do you see next for the Dusty Sage branching empire?
Well, I know there will be another act to my story.
Right.
And I think it's important to continually keep yourself interested. If you're going to keep other people interested, you have to be interested as well. And I have tried in these last 5 to 10 years to get more involved in charity work. Aside from the Walt Disney birthplace, I helped launch the Dick Van Dyke Foundation for the Performing Arts. I am on the board of directors of the Garner Holt Foundation. Garner, as you know him very well, builds animatronics for the theme parks, but wants to leave a legacy that inspires kids that might not have the means to get involved in an engineering and artistic background like an Imagineer would have, provide them with the resources they need and the inspiration that they need through the building of animatronics to get involved in the theme park arts. And recently I've also taken over the running of Walt Disney's last surviving home, the Woking Way Estate in the Hollywood Hills, which is so charming, 1932 mansion at the top of the hill. And it's a great story as well. So in a way, the two houses are sort of bookends. The Chicago house, Walt's very meager youth, 7 Disney family members living together in a tiny, tiny 3-bedroom house in Chicago, to the Woking Way Estate, which is palatial and had room for Walt to have a large family, which he didn't have. He ended up only having the 2 children, but he could have had a much larger family. So I see that side of me as being more of what I'm going to pursue as times go on, producing more events. I have a big one coming up we'll talk about in a moment, doing more charity work, and doing more travel, and beyond just Disney. I share something in common with you. I love to cruise, and I try to go on 3 or 4 or more cruises a year on all the cruise lines, Disney, Virgin, Royal Caribbean. I just love unpacking my suitcase once and waking up in the morning in a new world. And so I think I'll do more writing, Bob, but it's going to be on a broader range of travel topics.
You've got something coming up. Tell me about what's coming up next at a public-like thing.
Yes, well, there's a few things coming up. I have some tours coming up at the Disney Mansion. You can find out more about the mansion on Facebook. Just search Disney Storybook Mansion, Walt Disney Storybook Mansion, and you'll see a black and white drawing that was done by Disney artist Mike Peraza, and you'll know you're on the correct page. But the event that I'm very excited about is the 50th anniversary of an attraction that you helped destroy, and not in a bad way, but Knott's Berry Tales, that was the artistic masterpiece of Rolly Crump, who you worked with for many years. When Rolly left Disney, he built Knott's Berry Tales with his son Chris Crump. And it was just an acid trip of a ride that was kind of perfect for the time period. It would have been 50 years old on July 4th. So the next day, July 5th, we'll do an event at Knott's Berry Farm that celebrates the attraction. Guests will get to walk the track of the current version of the attraction, which is again called Berry Tales, but now it's a shoot 'em up kind of ride with digital screens, but it's the same theme. And it's the same track, basically, that it was before. So you get to walk that track. There will be a buffet, Mrs. Knott's Chicken Dinner style buffet inside of what replaced the Ghost Town Steakhouse.
Are you going to invite me?
Bob, you have to be there.
Oh.
There'll be a presentation by Knott's Berry Tales book authors, Christopher Merritt, who is an incredible former Imagineer, and Eric Linksweiler. He's a historian on Orange County and Kitsch. He shares a lot in common with Charles Phoenix. He's a really fun guy. Those two are putting together a panel discussion. So they'll show the only known full ride-through of the original version of the attraction. So you get to see that. And then the original designers, who are still amongst the living, are going to be there at a huge panel in Mrs. Murphy's Steakhouse in Ghost Town. And it's just going to be spectacular. It includes your admission to the park, the buffet, the panels, the walkthrough. I mean, it's going to be a day from 8 a.m. until about 2 p.m.
Oh, this will be wonderful, because as you mentioned about destroyed that. That same room, literally, was the Rolly's. It was like an enchanted forest. They just had loose pieces, almost like paper, dangling from the ceiling, and all these little kitschy little Trump-like things, and this little car would go do things like that. And I thought it was so charming. And then we find out, well, they were going to put dinosaurs in there.
That's right.
And then the company I was with at the time, Sequoia Creative, won the bid for building animals. And the funniest thing happened was the drawings that were sent to Sequoia to build the animals was the wrong scale, and the animals were built double-sized, and it was not discovered between the two companies until the first animals arrived, and they were monstrous and were not fitting the set. And there was some scrambling in which there is no time. They've got to literally redesign the arrangement. But the joke was, it came out way more terrifying for the guests. So little kids, you had these monstrous creatures in that room.
Wow.
And of course, then it was finally taken out and replaced by a ride maybe a dozen years ago, and where the President of Knott's called me down there and said, well, since you had a finger in this little room too, why don't you do the publicity for 2 hours?
Voyage to the Iron Reef.
Yeah, to the Iron Reef.
I remember you standing up there on the loading platform looking down at all of us and waving your hands and talking. That was amazing.
So I should be there at your party, because I've been triple connected with that room.
So you heard it here, folks. Bob Gurr is going to be there at the event as well on July 6th.
Right.
If you want to know more information about that event, I'm sure it'll be in the show notes. But also, if you visit MiceChat.com, we have a banner for the event right there on the site. Click on that. It takes you to an article about the event that tells a little bit about the history of the attraction. Some beautiful photos that give you a sense of how whimsical it was. I think there are a lot of people that never rode Knott's Berry Tales, but they should come to the event to see what creativity by a former Disney Imagineer would be like if the company is not overly involved in the design of it.
Yes.
It's like at Disney, you would never be able to design a ride like that without 100 other people looking at it first and saying what you could and couldn't do. But at Knott's, Raleigh basically just drafted up some sketches, and Marion Knott said, okay, and they built it.
Yeah, well, it was a dream job for Rowley because he learned everything from Walt, everything about Disneyland, contributed so much, and then with his own Mariposa company, he could sketch this thing up, and Knott's would buy it and put it in. It was totally charming. It was the cutest little thing because it was very light-hearted type of art direction.
Yes.
On a really tight budget to put that in there. So anyway, this is going to be a good one because people can retrospect how many things were in that room, and oh my goodness, what might be coming next someday.
That's right.
Well, anyway, Dusty, thanks for coming down here to beautiful downtown Orange and speaking to me here on KGUR here, right in our little town with our little devil here. And I'm looking forward to this. So I really want to follow what you're going to invent next, what thing you're going to be boosting, inventing, and marketing. I want to live past 100 years old so I can keep up with your expanding mind.
Well, I'm going to need you to do that, Bob, because I hope you're there with me every step of the way.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, my friend.
Appreciate it. Okay, the kids, you have had a chance to listen to an utterly brilliant guy who explodes in all different directions, and I don't think he's ever going to stop. So thank you for watching this time. See you next time.